Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of information and extract the crucial insights for you. Today we're tackling something driven by, well, a need we all feel, storing more and more stuff. The data we create just keeps growing, right? Bigger files, more media.
Absolutely. And, the ways we store data now, your standard hard drives, even Blu-rays, they're kind of hitting a wall, physically speaking. But there's this really fascinating alternative out there called holographic data storage. It really could change the game.
Exactly. Imagine storing way, way more information than we can now and getting to it super fast. It sounds a bit sci-fi, I know, but it's got real science behind it, and there's actually a growing market interest. So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack what holographic data storage actually is, why it's got people excited, the science stuff, who's working on it, and what the future might hold.
Yeah, and to do that, we've dug into some pretty detailed scientific papers, the kind you find on SpringerLink, for instance. And we've also looked at market reports, like from Acumen Insights, just to get the business side too. We want to give you a really solid picture.
Okay, let's get right to it then. What is holographic data storage? Because it's not like storing data as little ones and zeros on a disk, right? It's totally different.
Totally different. The basic idea is you use lasers, but instead of writing tiny dots, you record information as these complex 3D interference patterns. Like picture two laser beams crossing inside a special material. Where they meet, their light waves interfere, creating light and dark spots, and that pattern holds the data.
So not bit by bit, but like whole pages of information at once. How do you manage that?
Right, pages. That's done using something called a spatial light modulator, an SLM. Think of it like a tiny, super high-res screen, millions of little pixels you can switch on or off to block or let light through. So you make a pattern on the SLM that represents your page of data. A laser beam shines through it, picks up that pattern. That's your data beam or signal beam.
Okay, and that signal beam then meets up with another beam, the reference beam, inside the storage stuff, the medium, and makes a hologram.
Yeah.
Got it. So what are the big wins here? Obviously, huge capacity, but what else?
Well, that whole page at a time thing, it means really fast data transfer rates. We're talking potentially around 1.0 gigabit per second, maybe more eventually. That's significantly faster than a lot of what we use today. So for you, if you're handling gig files, that speed boost could, really cut down waiting times.
Right, faster transfers, less waiting. Makes sense. What about getting the data back? Is that quicker too?
Yes, absolutely. Rapid access is another key advantage. Because you grab a whole page at once, the system doesn't have to physically hunt for individual bits like a hard drive head does. It's just fundamentally faster retrieval.
Okay, now this is where I saw something really wild. It can do more than just store stuff, like calculations on images. How does that work?
It is pretty wild. Yeah, because of how the data is encoded in those interference patterns, you can do some clever tricks. By playing with the reference beams when you read the data back, it's theoretically possible to do math directly on the stored image data. Add images, subtract them right there in the memory.
That's, wow, a completely different way to think about memory. Any other sort of tricks up its sleeve?
Well, there's potential for advanced encryption built right in, and also something called associative searching. Imagine searching a huge database not by file name, but by the content. Like, find me all pictures that look like this, or all documents about that concept. The system could potentially pull out all matches simultaneously.
That could change how we search huge data sets completely. So it's not just more space, it's new capabilities. Now, you mentioned current storage is hitting limits. What exactly are those barriers?
Sure. So for magnetic storage hard drives, we're bumping up against what's called the paramagnetic limit. As you try to make the magnetic bits tinier and pack them closer to get more density, they become unstable. Their magnetic direction can flip just from room temperature heat. Not good for your data.
Okay, instability. And what about optical discs?
Yeah.
CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays?
There, the main problem is the diffraction limit of light itself. You can't focus a laser beam down to an infinitely small point because light acts like a wave. That physical limit restricts how small you can make the pits or marks on the disk and how close together you can put them. It fundamentally caps the density on a 2D surface. Holography gets around that by using the whole 3D volume.
Right, using the depth. Okay, so we see the potential. Let's get deeper into the science. How does the recording and retrieving actually happen, step by step?
Okay, so recording. You start with one laser beam and you split it in two. One beam, the signal arm, goes through that SLM we talked about, picking up the data pattern, the page of ones and zeros represented by light and dark spots. The other beam, the reference arm, is usually just a plain angled beam, no data on it. Then you make these two beams cross paths, intersect inside the special holographic material.
And that intersection point is where the magic happens, where the data gets stored.
Exactly. Where those two beams overlap, their light waves interfere, adding together in some places, canceling out in others. This interference pattern creates tiny localized changes in the optical properties of the material, usually its refractive index, how much it bends light. That physical change is the stored hologram, representing that page of data.
Okay, so the pattern's locked in the material. How do you read it back?
To read it, you basically just shine the reference beam back through the recorded spot in the material at the exact same angle you used to record it. The stored hologram now acts like a complex diffraction grating. It bends that incoming reference beam. And remarkably, the way it bends the light reconstructs the original signal beam, the one that carried the data pattern from the SLM. This reconstructed beam then shines onto a detector array, like a CMOS camera chip, which reads the pattern of light and dark spots, turning it back into digital data.
That's really elegant. But if you store lots of these holograms in the same chunk of material, how do you stop them blurring together? That must be where multiplexing comes in.
Precisely. Multiplexing is the key to getting that massive storage density. You need to stack many holograms in the same volume. There are a few ways to do it, but they all take advantage of the fact that these volume holograms are very sensitive to the angle and the wavelength, the color of the light used.
Can you give us an example? How does, say, angular multiplexing work?
Sure, angular multiplexing is a common one. You record your first hologram using the reference beam coming in at a specific angle. Then, to record a second hologram right in the same spot, you just slightly change the angle of that reference beam, then change it again for the third, and so on. The crucial physics here is called the Bragg effect. Think of the hologram as layers within the material. It only strongly diffracts light, reconstructs the data when the reading beam comes in at the exact angle it was recorded at. So shine the light at angle 1, you get page 1 back. Shine it at angle 2, you get page 2. They don't really interfere.
Ah, okay. It's like having lots of radio stations broadcasting in the same space, but you only hear the one your radio is tuned to. The angle is the tuning dial.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah.
Hmm.
Another way is wavelength multiplexing. Instead of changing the angle, you change the color, the wavelength of the laser slightly for each hologram. This works particularly well in what's called reflection geometry, where the signal and reference beams enter from opposite sides of the material. That setup gives you the best wavelength selectivity.
You've mentioned this Bragg effect a couple of times. Can you break that down a bit more? Why is it so critical?
Okay, so the Bragg effect basically describes how light waves interact with periodic structures, like the layers or fringes formed by the interference pattern inside the hologram. Maximum diffraction, meaning the brightest reconstruction of your data page, happens only when the angle and wavelength of the reading beam perfectly satisfy the Bragg condition set by the spacing of those recorded fringes. If you're off by even a tiny bit in angle or a tiny bit in wavelength, the amount of light diffracted drops off dramatically. This high selectivity is what lets you pick out just one hologram from potentially hundreds or thousands stored in the same place. And the thicker the recording material generally, the more selective it is.
Okay, that selectivity is key. So what are these magic materials that can actually store these holograms? You mentioned photopolymers.
Photopolymers are a major category, yeah. These are materials, often like a clear plastic or gel initially, that change permanently when you expose them to light of the right color. The light triggers chemical reactions. Usually it causes monomers, small molecules, to link together into long polymer chains. At the same time, different components in the material might move around, diffuse, concentrating in either the light or dark areas of the interference pattern. Both these effects change the refractive index, creating the hologram.
So the bright parts of the interference pattern trigger more reaction or attract different stuff, changing how light bends there compared to the dark parts.
Exactly. A big plus for photopolymers is real-time recording the hologram forms as you expose it, no messy chemical development needed afterwards. But that can also be a downside. Sometimes unwanted noise gratings can form while you're recording lots of holograms. The interplay between how fast the polymerization happens and how fast the other components diffuse is really crucial for hologram quality. Researchers actually use a parameter, sometimes called R, to describe this balance.
Are there other catches with photopolymers? Any big challenges?
Oh yeah, a big one is shrinkage. As the material polymerizes, it often shrinks slightly, just a tiny percentage usually, but even a small shrinkage can distort the recorded hologram fringes, meaning the Bragg angle for readout might shift a bit, which is annoying. Another limitation is dynamic range. Basically, the material only has so much recording capacity. You can only record so many holograms on top of each other before they start getting faint or noisy. People are working on ways around this, like using two different colors of light for recording, which can sometimes help.
Interesting. Are there other types of materials besides photopolymers?
Yes, another important class is photorefractive materials. These are often crystals, like lithium niobate. In these, light doesn't usually cause a permanent chemical change. Instead, it excites electrons, which then move around inside the crystal and get trapped elsewhere. This separation of charge creates internal electric fields, and those fields change the refractive index via something called the electro-optic effect. That change forms the hologram. Photorefractives are cool because you can often erase them with uniform light and rewrite them. But they can suffer from dark decay, the trapped electrons leak away over time, and the hologram fades. They can also be sensitive to background light. And the traps for these electrons can be shallow or deep, which affects how long the hologram lasts.
Got it. And I saw this term M number or MSHAP floating around the research. What's that about?
M number. Yeah, MSHAG is basically a figure of merit for holographic materials. It kind of quantifies the material's overall capacity or sensitivity for recording multiple holograms. A higher MSHAG generally means you can store more holograms with good brightness, diffraction efficiency, and a given thickness of material. So a higher MSHAG is definitely something researchers strive for.
Okay, this science is fascinating, really intricate.
Hmm.
But let's shift gears a bit. Is this stuff actually getting out of the lab? You mentioned market growth earlier.
Yes, it seems to be gaining traction. That Acumen Insights report, we looked at projects, the global market for holographic data storage to grow from about 1.94 million US dollars in 2024 up to around 8.05 million by 2032. That's a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR of 17.6%.
Wow, 17.6% CAGR. That's pretty hefty growth.
It is. It suggests there's real commercial interest building up. So for you listening, this indicates that what might have seemed like purely lab research is starting to move towards actual products and applications. It's gathering momentum.
Okay, significant growth projected. So who are the companies actually pushing this forward? Are there, like, systems you can buy or that are close?
Well, several players have been key. In-Phase Technologies was a big name for a while. They demonstrated working prototypes and achieved some impressive storage densities back in the day. Then there was Aconia Holographics. They made significant progress before, interestingly, being acquired by Apple a few years back.
Apple bought a holographic storage company. That is interesting. Makes you wonder what they might be planning.
Doesn't it? And Microsoft, too, through their High-Speed Data Group, or HSD, has definitely been involved in research in this area, though maybe less publicly visible recently.
So some big tech names are involved or have been. What about the earlier history? The outline mentioned Bell Labs, IBM.
Oh yeah, the history goes way back. Bell Labs did foundational work in the 60s and 70s. IBM had a major project called HOSP Holographic Optical Storage Project. RCA built experimental systems in the 70s too. And companies like 3M, Thomson CSF over in Europe, NSE, Hitachi in Japan, optical data systems. Quite a few took a serious look and built prototypes over the decades. A lot of that early work didn't lead to commercial products then. Maybe the tech wasn't quite ready, but it laid crucial groundwork.
So a long road of innovation. The U.S. Military Research Agency, DARPA, was mentioned too. What was their angle?
DARPA played a really important role, especially through funding programs like PRISM. That one focused specifically on photorefractive materials, trying to solve some of the fundamental material science problems. By funding universities and companies, DARPA helped push the materials forward, which was a critical bottleneck for a long time.
And Tamarack storage devices. What piece of the puzzle did they work on?
Tamarack focused more on the system integration side, particularly on designing the complex optical head, the part that actually reads and writes the holograms. Getting that right is obviously essential.
Okay, so we've got the science, the market buzz, the players. What about the nuts and bolts? What are the key components inside a holographic storage drive? It's not just the special material, right?
Definitely not. It's a whole system. The laser source itself is obviously critical. You need a laser that's highly coherent, meaning its light waves are very orderly in space and time. It needs enough power, needs to be stable in its output and wavelength, and ideally you want it cheap and small. Diode-pumped, solid-state lasers, DPSS lasers, and certain types of semiconductor lasers like DFB lasers are common candidates.
Right, the laser. And we talked about the SLM, the spatial light modulator, for making the data pages. What makes a good SLM for this?
Speed is vital for high data rates. Resolution is key for packing lots of data onto each page. High contrast between the on and off pixels is crucial, otherwise your data gets noisy. Liquid crystal-based SLMs are common, but sometimes can have issues with late polarization. DMDs, digital micromirror devices like those in projectors, are another option, often faster. Sometimes people use clever tricks like putting tiny lenses, lenslet arrays, in front of the SLM to gather more light and improve efficiency.
And then reading the data back to the detector array.
Yes, the detector. Usually a CCD sensor like in older digital cameras, or more commonly now, a CMOS active pixel sensor or APS. CMOS sensors are generally cheaper to make, can be faster, and you can often build other control circuits right onto the same chip, which is a big advantage. Things like fill factor matter how much of each pixel actually detects light. Sometimes they add tiny microlenses over each pixel to focus more light onto the sensitive area.
I also came across stuff about modulation codes and error correction codes. Why are those needed? Seems complex enough already.
Huh. Yeah, it is complex, but they're crucial for reliability. Modulation codes are ways of arranging the data patterns on the SLM to make them easier to read accurately. For instance, a balanced code tries to ensure roughly equal numbers of light and dark pixels on each page, which helps avoid problems with varying overall brightness affecting the detector. And error correction codes, ECC, like Reed-Solomon codes, which are also used on CDs and DVDs, are absolutely essential. They add some redundant information to the data. This allows the system to detect and, importantly, correct a certain number of errors that inevitably creep in during recording or reading. ECC lets you get away with a slightly higher raw error rate, which actually increases the usable storage capacity.
Ah, so they build in some error fixing capability. That makes sense for real-world use.
Yeah.
And equalization, what's that for?
Equalization is basically signal processing done after the data is read by the detector. When you reconstruct the hologram, the spots of light on the detector aren't perfectly sharp points. They can blur slightly and spill over into neighboring pixel areas. This is called interpixel interference. Equalization algorithms analyze the received signal and try to electronically sharpen it up, compensating for that blurring and improving the accuracy of the data recovery.
Okay, it really is a finely tuned system with all these optical and electronic parts working together. So looking ahead now, what are the investment angles? Where's the opportunity?
Well, the fundamental driver is that relentless demand for more storage, faster storage. Think cloud data centers, archiving massive scientific data sets, maybe high-end video production. Anywhere capacity and speed are bottlenecks with current tech, holographic storage becomes potentially very interesting. That creates the basic investment case, betting on this technology solving a real growing problem.
The need is definitely there. So where's the research focus now? What needs to improve to make it mainstream?
A lot of work still goes into materials. Can we get higher dynamic range for more holograms? Can we make them truly non-volatile, holding data for decades without degradation? Better optical quality, less light scatter? Laser technology is always advancing cheaper, smaller, more stable, maybe even tunable lasers for wavelength multiplexing. And system design, smarter multiplexing schemes, more compact and integrated optics and electronics. Making it all robust and cost-effective is the big engineering challenge.
Do you see this replacing hard drives and SSDs everywhere eventually? Or is it more specialized?
I think it's more likely to find its niche initially. Maybe not replacing your laptop's SSD anytime soon, but for large-scale long-term archival, it has huge potential.
Mhm.
Or in supercomputing, where you need to feed processors with massive amounts of data incredibly quickly. That's where its unique strengths really shine. So complementing existing tech or maybe surpassing it in those specific areas.
But still hurdles to clear before we see it widely used.
Oh, absolutely. Cost is still a major factor. High-performance lasers, high-resolution SLMs, precision optics, that stuff isn't cheap yet. Standardization is another one. For different systems to work together, you need industry standards for media formats, interfaces, etc. That takes time to develop. And just proving long-term reliability and robustness in demanding real-world environments, that's always key for any storage technology.
So looking further out, what advancements might we see? Even smaller drives? Crazy high densities?
Yeah, potentially. Continued integration could lead to much more compact systems. Maybe holographic drives closer in size to current formats. Further refinements in multiplexing and materials could push densities even higher. Imagine terabytes on a single disk becoming commonplace. And maybe realizing that dream of truly non-volatile media that lasts practically forever without power, that would be a game changer for archival.
Well, this has been a seriously fascinating deep dive. Holographic storage. It really does feel like it could fundamentally shift how we handle data. We've covered the clever science, the long journey it's taken, the market starting to bubble up, and what might be coming next. It feels, I don't know, less like science fiction now and more like engineering in progress.
I agree. It's made huge strides. It's not vaporware. It's a technology with real substance, wrestling with those final engineering and cost challenges to make a broader impact.
Definitely. So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on.
Okay.
We're generating data at an insane exponential rate. AI models, gene sequencing, immersive entertainment, you name it. If we suddenly had access to truly massive storage capacity, coupled with incredibly high speeds like holography promises, what completely new things might become possible? What applications, maybe ones we haven't even conceived of yet, could spring up when the old limits on data just dissolve? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.